Random House Audio presents Divine Evil by Nora Roberts. Read for you by Katie Firth. The rite began an hour after sunset. The circle had been prepared long ago, a perfect 9 feet, by the clearing of trees and young saplings. The ground had been sprinkled with consecrated earth. Clouds, dark and secretive, danced over the pale moon. 13 figures, in black cowls and cloaks, stood inside the protective circle. For a moment, there was only the murmur of the wind through the early spring leaves. In the pit at the left side of the circle, the fire already smoldered. Soon the flames would rise up, called by that same wind or other forces. It was May Day Eve, the Sabbat of Rudemas. On this night of high spring, both celebration and sacrifice would be given for the fertility of crops and for the power of men. 2 women, dressed in red robes, stepped into the circle. Their faces were not hooded and were very white, with a slash of scarlet over their lips, like vampires who had already feasted. One, following the careful instructions she'd been given, shed her robe and stood naked in the light of a dozen black candles, then draped herself over a raised slab of polished wood. She would be their altar of living flesh, the virgin on which they would worship. The fact that she was a prostitute and far from pure disturbed some of them. Others simply relished her lush curves and generously spread thighs. The high priest, having donned his mask of the goat of Mendes, began to chant in bastardized Latin. When he had finished his recitation, he raised his arms high toward the inverted pentagram above the altar. A bell was rung to purify the air. From her hiding place in the brush, a young girl watched, her eyes wide with curiosity. She began wondering where her father was. She'd hidden in his car, giggling to herself at the trick she was playing on him. When she had followed him through the woods, she hadn't been afraid of the dark. She had hidden, waiting for the right time to jump out and into his arms. But he had put on a long dark coat, like the others, and now she wasn't sure which one was Daddy. Though the naked woman both embarrassed and fascinated her, what the grown-ups were doing no longer seemed like a game. She felt her heart beating in her throat when the man in the mask began to chant again. "We call on Ammon, the god of life and reproduction, on Pan, the god of lust." After the calling of each name, the others repeated it. The list was long. The group was swaying now, a deep hum rising up among them while the high priest drank from a silver chalice. Finished, he set the cup down between the breasts of the altar. He took up a sword, and pointing it south, east, north, and west, called up the 4 princes of hell. "Satan, lord of fire. Lucifer, bringer of light. Belial, who has no master. Leviathan, serpent of the deep." In the brush, the young girl shuddered and was afraid. "Ave, Satan. I call upon you, Master, Prince of Darkness, King of the Night. Throw wide the gates of hell and hear us." The high priest shouted the words, not like a prayer, but a demand. The chant of the circle of 12 swelled behind him. At some signal, 2 of the cloaked figures pulled a young goat into the circle. As its eyes rolled in fright, they chanted over it, nearly screaming now. The athamas was drawn, the ceremonial knife whose freshly whetted blade glimmered under the rising moon. When the girl saw the blade slice across the white goat's throat, she tried to scream, but no sound passed her lips. She wanted to run, but her legs seemed rooted to the ground. She covered her face with her hands, weeping and wanting to call for her father. When at last she looked again, the ground ran with blood. It dripped over the sides of a shallow silver bowl. The voices of the men were a roaring buzz in her ears, as she watched them throw the headless carcass of the goat into the fire pit. Now the stink of roasting flesh hung sickeningly in the air. With an ululent cry, the man in the goat mask tore off his cloak. Beneath he was naked, his white skin glimmering with sweat, though the night was cool. Glinting on his chest was a silver amulet, inscribed with old and secret symbols. He straddled the altar, then drove himself hard between her thighs. With a howling scream, a second man fell on the other woman, dragging her to the ground, while the others tore off their cloaks to dance naked around the pit of fire. She saw her father, her own father, dip his hands into the sacrificial blood. As he capered with the others, it dripped from his fingers. Clare woke, screaming. Breathless, chilled with sweat, she huddled under the blankets. With a trembling hand, she fumbled for the switch on the bedside lamp. When that wasn't enough, she rose to flip on others until the small room was flooded with light. Her hands were still unsteady when she drew a cigarette from a pack and struck a match. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she smoked in silence. Why had the dream come back now? Her therapist would say it was a knee-jerk reaction to her mother's recent marriage. Subconsciously, she felt her father had been betrayed. That was bull. Clare blew out a defiant stream of smoke. Her mother had been widowed for over 12 years. Any sane, loving daughter would want her happiness. And she was a loving daughter. She just wasn't so sure about the sane part. She remembered the first time she'd had the dream. She'd been 6 and had wakened screaming in her bed, just as she had tonight. But then her parents had rushed in to gather her up and soothe. Even her brother Blair had come in, wide-eyed and wailing. Her mother had carried him off, while her father stayed with her, crooning in his calm, quiet voice, promising her over and over that it was only a dream, a bad dream that she would soon forget. And she had, for long stretches of time. Then it would creep up on her when she was tense or exhausted or vulnerable. She stabbed out the cigarette and pressed her fingers to her eyes. Well, she was tense now. Her one-woman show was less than a week away, and though she had personally chosen each piece of sculpture that would be shown, she was plagued with doubts. Perhaps it was because the critics had been so enthusiastic 2 years before, at her debut. Now that she was enjoying success, there was so much more to lose. And she knew that the work that would be shown was her best. If it was found to be mediocre, then she, as an artist, was mediocre. Was there any label more damning? She rose and opened the draperies. The sun was just coming up, giving the streets and sidewalks of downtown Manhattan an almost rosy hue. Pushing open the window, she shivered in the chill of the spring morning. There was a light in the bakery directly across and 3 stories down. Clare caught the faint strains of Rigoletto and the good yeasty scent of baking bread. A cab rumbled past, valves knocking. Then there was silence. She might have been alone in the city. Was that what she wanted, she wondered? To be alone, to find some spot and dig into solitude? There were times when she felt so terribly disconnected, yet unable to make a place just for herself. Wasn't that why her marriage had failed? She had loved Rob, but she had never felt connected to him. When it was over, she'd felt regret, but not remorse. Or perhaps Dr. Janofsky was right, and she was burying her remorse, all of it, every ounce of grief she had felt since her father died, channeling it out through her art. She stood, her bright red hair disheveled from restless sleep, her face pale and tired, watching the light grow and listening to the noise begin as the city woke. Then she turned away, ready for work. It was after 2 when she took a break. She was tired, but much too restless to nap or to stretch out on the floor and devour some daytime television. On impulse, she rose and went to a large trunk that served as seat, table, and catch-all. Digging in, she riffled through until she found a photo album. She was lonely, Clare admitted.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?